Dave, it's so great connecting again today. I don't think I've ever told you this, but the very first recruiting letter I got when I was in high school was from Lloyd Carr at Michigan.
Mm,
10 years later, I was admitted to Michigan Law School and all but accepted, all but enrolled, basically. And then last minute, I ended up going to Stanford. 10 years after that, I interviewed with you for a job at the University of Michigan. So, although I've never attended Michigan or worked at Michigan, I still feel a kinship to all Michigan people and you. So, again, it's great to reconnect.
so close. We almost had you.
So many times. And my wife and I, and what's funny too is I ended up getting a job at Notre Dame. And the very first football game we went to at Notre Dame was against Michigan.
There you go.
And we sat right next to the band, and the Michigan fight song is my most favorite fight song. So I do feel connected. Well, uh, it's so great to talk with you again today. You've already had a great career at Michigan, and I know you still have a ton of great production ahead of you. So as you think back on what you've learned, what would you most like to pass on to others?
Yeah. Well, thanks a lot for having me, Nate. It's been fun to see all the Nate's notes and look at it, all that you've done so far with the podcast. I guess when I think about this question, I tend to think about just more broadly what it means to lead a good life. And I've come to believe it's really three things, and I'll spend a little bit of time with that and then pass it back to you. But I think about it as being good, feeling good, and doing good. And so I'll take a quick step back and just explain kind of how I got to that spot. So briefly, about 7 years ago, about a month short of my 40th birthday, I got a call that you don't want to get from your doctor. They said, Dave, the test results are back and you have testicular cancer. And so it was really like quite a blow and a surprise. So it's not something I was anticipating. Fortunately, we caught it early. I was able to have surgery, and I've been healthy since. So it hasn't had that type of monster long-term effect on my life. But the experience, I think, coupled with the big 4-0, started to make me think more about things and really think about my kids. The much the same way that your kids were an impetus for the thinking about the podcast. So I currently have a 14-year-old daughter and a 10-year-old son. And I really thought to myself, well, what do I want for my kids? And when I boiled it down, I want them to be good, meaning, to be effective, to have the right habits, to be able to manage their time and attention, to regulate their behavior, to work hard, to, have toughness, basically to achieve whatever goals they want. I also want them to feel good. I want them to be mentally and physically healthy, connected to other people, experience joy, even though life can have many challenges. And the last part is about doing good, to live a meaningful life, to do something that positively impacts the world. In Judaism, we talk about this Hebrew term called tikkun olam, which means to repair the world. And so to have that type of a mindset. And I teach a class here at Michigan Ross, at the Ross School of Business at University of Michigan, that really uses that framework. That's a lot of fun. So I'm happy to spend a couple of minutes on each of these, but wanted to see if you had just any reactions or thoughts before I keep going.
Well, I just think it's such an impressive framework, and you're probably going to talk about this, and so I'm hesitant to like steal your thunder, but you sent me an email this morning with these topics. So maybe you could just jump in and talk about how long you've been thinking about this framework and how Nate's notes can fit into this framework as well. Because I was just so
Yeah,
impressed.
quick plug, check out Nate's notes. Uh, I went through in some detail, and it was a fun exercise for me. I was just curious what type of advice folks were giving. And I do think these are broad topics. And so in general, it wasn't difficult to fit the different pieces of advice into these three categories. So I guess on some level, it's something I've thought about for a long time. A lot of folks who have a positive psychology type bend, I think they focus on the feeling good part a lot. So like, how am I improve on happiness, things like that, which is really important. think ethics folks like us probably focus more on that last one about doing good. I think society in general is probably in the more in the how to, be good and be effective. When I looked through all the Nate's notes, there were far more things about how to be effective than to be good than anything else. But yeah, I'm happy to mention a little bit on each one of those.
Yeah, why don't you go through, because I was just so impressed. I now have this beautiful Word document with these categories and all of the different episodes and lessons categorized accordingly. So yeah, why don't you spend some time on each?
Okay, sounds great. So have you when I think about being good, have you heard that story about like the three jars and the rocks and the sand? You heard of that analogy around time?
There's one I'm thinking of, but why don't you just go ahead with it?
Okay. So the idea is that, there's a teacher who has a jar, fills it up with rocks, and then asks the class, she says, could I fit anything else in here? And the class says no. And then she takes some pebbles out and puts them into the jar, and they fall down. And then they realize, yeah, like a lot more could go in there. And then she says, is that all that could go in there? And they said, yeah, it's full now. And then she takes sand and pours the sand in, and it flows all the way through. And so you've got sand and pebbles and rocks. And the idea is it's a metaphor around time. The rocks, or the big rocks, being the things that matter most to you. And the idea that if we do things around pebbles or sand, emails or many, many meetings or what have you, then we don't have time for the bigger rocks. And so when I think about being good, and when I teach and I work with students and executives on this topic, I really try to get folks to think about what is the rock that matters the most. And I would say I could choose, it could be in different domains of life. I would say for a work-related rock, I feel like the single biggest factor for me is really about a morning routine. Like some of your other guests mentioned, the idea of deep work. So really focused 1 or 2 hours on something that takes a lot of cognitive effort. I think that that's something that most people don't do. And I know that when I do that, my day feels so much better. It's interesting because when I ask students or business leaders about this topic, should I start my day with something easy and kind of work my way up, or should I start with the hardest thing of the day? About 2/3 of the group generally says start easy and then build some momentum. And the science on this actually tells us that phrase, eat that frog. So to actually get started on the hardest thing first, because otherwise we just won't get to it. So it's not something I'm perfect at, but I know my day goes a lot better when I've got the rock, the different rocks in my mind, and my work-related rock I'm trying to tackle when I have my most energy, which for me is usually first thing in the morning. Do you have a peak time where you like that's when you get your real stuff done?
Oh, I 100% agree with you that the so for example, meditation for me is
Yep.
kind of I try to make that the foundation of every day, kind of religious meditation, big picture thinking, how's my life? And when I was a kid, I would just kind of fit it in wherever. When I went to my very first semester of college, I decided to do it first thing.
Mm.
Take 15 minutes, 20 minutes. And what I found is it completely changed the course of my day. I had a clearer mind. I was more focused. In high school, I was like a B plus student. Get some A's, mostly, a lot of B's, some C's. Because I couldn't stay focused.
Mm.
And so when this first semester of college, I shifted that, where I started just like meditating first, and it was just incredible to me. Like I could stay focused, and I wouldn't get distracted. And then the other thing that it made me think of is I had this football coach at BYU, Robert Anae, offensive coordinator, and his whole thing was start fast, start fast. So every practice session you start fast, so that when kickoff happens, you start fast, you don't ease into it. And so what we would do, most football practices are structured, you warm up, you do some individual drills, then maybe you do some one-on-ones, and you're building and towards the last kind of 30 minutes where it's going to be a team, scrimmage. So he flipped it. First thing, was you get to practice and you do a team drill right away to practice starting fast. So I love this idea of eat the frog. I don't know that I've heard that phrase,
Yeah.
but I am trying to do this as well now with my research, where I do the meditation piece first, and then I try to do the research first. I need to get better at it. Knock that out, and then whatever happens the rest of the day, it's a success.
Yeah, it's so hard to not like dive right into email or something else, but like that keystone habit around like meditation, like I think knowing the one or two or three things that you have to do in your day for the day to really work and just, to
Do those.
prioritize it. I think that's a biggie.
And it's so hard to not just pick up our phone, like
I
first thing
know.
in the morning, like just reach for it. And I'm trying to train myself, like, no, put that off for 30 minutes, an hour, 2 hours.
It's interesting. I was teaching an executive education, and we have a bunch of business leaders in the room, and the CEO was in the room as well. We were talking about these topics, and I asked does anyone in the room not sleep with your phone in your room? And the only person who said yes was the CEO. He's like,
Wow.
I turn off my phone at 9. I put it in a different room. I hang out with my wife for a little bit, and then, I'm ready for bed.
I should this makes me want to do that. Just put the phone in a different room. I was listening to something the other day and they're like, look, your phone has the collective knowledge and wisdom of every past generation. Of
Mhm.
course we want to go for it. Like it's understandable that we want to go for it. So making it difficult to pick up my phone is probably the best strategy, rather than relying on my own kind of willpower to not access, the greatest connective network in the history of humanity.
For sure. It's so tempting. So I think like the idea of that from the habits research around structuring your environment rather than willpower that's a biggie.
Yeah.
Uh, all right, wanted me to jump to this next one around
Yeah,
feeling
sure.
better. Cool. So I hear this a lot, from like friends and undergraduates and MBA students and doctoral students and business leaders. They'll often say, well, once I get done with this, then I'll be, happier, or I'll be able to start exercising more, or being healthier, fill in the blank, like when I'm done recruiting for a job, or at the end of the semester, or once my relationship with a certain person improves. And clearly sometimes are more stressful than others. But I think on average, folks who push off that happiness and overall well-being to the future oftentimes just don't get to it. Marshall Goldsmith is a great executive coach. He has this idea around be happy now. And I'll add a little part. I would say be happy and healthy now.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that's been a tough one for me to learn, actually. I think oftentimes people who are motivated and sort of driven will go from one thing to the next to the next without actually like stopping to celebrate that. And I think it's important for me, it was a big realization to say at every life stage, there are parts that are horrible and parts that are amazing, and it's true at every life stage. And so I think like a lot of your former guests, I think putting relationships first is a great start. Some of that isn't always natural for me. So I actually have to really structure my day and really think about it to make sure I'm incorporating, wellness and connection uh, to make sure that I'm actually feeling better at the end of the day and over the course of a week or a month.
I love that phrase, be happy now and healthy now. And as you were talking, it makes me think that so much of feeling good is the outcome of being good, doing good. So I see these all, they're correlated, certainly. One of my favorite lines from some like ancient texts is people are writing, they say our lives passed as if it were a dream.
Mhm.
And the older I get, the more I feel like that, I'm plus 40, I'm halfway out, probably, if that, maybe more. And if I wait to be happy, like, when am I going to be happy? And so I just think I love this be happy and healthy now that you added. So we don't want to exercise, but the outcome of exercising is that helps us feel good. And it can be hard to prioritize the personal relationships, but the outcome of that is we're going to feel a lot better and healthier.
Yeah, I mean, these three goods are all interconnected. So usually if we do one, we're more effective in some way. We just sort of feel our mood is a little bit better. Maybe we have more capacity to then do things that benefit others. So they're definitely connected. And I'm also making these things sound like they're easier than they are. It's like, it's not such profound advice around try to be happy or have a good morning routine. It's just that it's actually for most people, it's sort of challenging to do. And then without mindfully thinking about and structuring your day, those things can just, fall through the cracks.
I was listening to a talk by Admiral McRaven a few weeks ago. Admiral
Yeah.
McRaven was a military leader that oversaw the raid for Osama, the raid where they killed Osama bin Laden, and also the raid that captured Saddam Hussein. And he was giving just an excellent talk on leadership. And he said, leadership is simple, but it's hard. And that's the point, right? Like, yeah,
Yeah.
these things are simple. The point of this podcast, simple, practical, underappreciated. But just because something is simple doesn't mean it's easy. And
Yeah,
just
that's
because
a great
something
point.
simple, it's simple, but it's hard.
Yeah. And does he talk also about making his bed? Is he
Yeah,
the making
he's the one. Yeah, he's got that viral commencement address at the University of Texas where he said, "Yep, make your bed, because then you've at least done one good thing in the morning. And if you have a crappy day, you come home, at least your bed is made."
I have a lot of people who have that on their list that they need to do in their day to get started off right.
Yeah, yeah. Great lesson from him. Yep. And very simple.
All right, last one here around doing good. I have this one exercise I like to do in class, and I'll use like an online like a tool where people can provide some answers without the rest of the class seeing. And so first, I'll ask them about three attributes that best describe a role model of yours. Three things that you want to be said about you at your eulogy. Maybe you do something like this in your ethics class. And then third, um, and there's a list of things you could improve on, but what do you want to work on to improve yourself the most? And so, not surprisingly, the descriptions of the mentors or role models and what folks want to have said about them at the end of their lives, they're almost identical. They consist almost exclusively of moral words. They say things like kind, caring, compassionate, honest, family oriented. And so in my mind, what they're telling us is that these are the qualities that people actually care about the most. Interestingly, when I ask them about what they want to work on, almost all of them focus on being good or like, how am I going to be more effective or more assertive or more creative or feeling good? How do I reduce anxiety or reduce depression so that my mood is more stable? And there's recent research on this that looks across a variety of different studies and samples and finds a very similar finding. And I found this in every single group I've ever worked with, that it's the exact same pattern, that moral words, working on becoming a better person, although people say it's the most important thing to them, tends to be a thing that they don't work on. And so I don't know if it's a society that has tricked us or nudged us in a particular direction. But I'm always reminded of Aristotle and thinking about virtues as we can improve those the same way we think about any other habits. And like you said, we don't know how much time we have. We have a limited amount of time. And so it's good that we feel good about ourselves as moral people. And also, we're not done muffins yet, and we can all get better in this space. And so that's what I try to remember for myself, and then, impart that when I'm working with different groups.
So I do something similar in my class, but I really like these questions, and I'm going to try to incorporate them, because we know that when we think about how we should behave, we think differently than when we suggest, for how like our friends should behave. So for example, Peter Attia, he's this doctor that's become
Sure.
quite famous right now, and he was just beating himself up so much. he had this voice inside him. He called it the inner Bobby Knight, and you're probably familiar with this, where he was so ruthless to himself, and it was destroying him.
Yeah.
And his therapist, so he checked into rehab, and they're like, look, when you feel this inner Bobby Knight talking to you and criticizing you and saying the most horrible, terrible things to yourself, imagine what a friend would say to you, and then write that down. And he was so much more kind to himself when he adopted the perspective as his friend. And so I like this question of not so much like, what do you want to become, but what do you admire in your role models? And maybe it helps us think with a slightly different perspective, because we're prone to miswant. We're prone to want and chase things that don't give us value. The other thing in my class, when I do something similar, so many of them will just say, like, what do you want out of life? It's like, I want to make a lot of money and retire in 20 years and travel the world. It's like, okay, that's fine. But if you're going to sacrifice all your health and your happiness now to get 20 years and then try to be happy and travel the world, it's not going to, I'm afraid it's a fool's trade.
I mean, if happiness is a habit and, meaning is a habit, then I think the idea that we'll just pick that up in 20 years feels less likely,
Yeah, I really like that. Make happiness and meaning a habit.
Yeah. And I think Peter Attia, I like follow him some too. And I was really sort of impressed by his vulnerability around talking about that issue, and seemed like someone so successful that it does, as we think about, how do we improve on anything, and particularly like in a moral domain, we do have to balance like self-acceptance with growth. And that balance I think is very challenging. We don't want to beat ourselves up because we're not going to be perfect in all of these ways. And yet, there's space to get better.
Well, this idea of balance is kind of one of the research questions I'm most focused on right now, and trying to produce something interesting and helpful there. So I'll keep you posted on that.
Yeah, reach out about it.
Yeah, I know you're great at categorizing things and thinking big picture, so I probably will take you up on that. Well, I just love this framework, Dave, and it's so helpful to me. And this is why I do the podcast, to be able to think about these things. And as we were talking before the podcast, this interviewing people and learning from them has just impacted my life for so much good. And then I love to hear these lessons with my wife and sharing with my kids and my students. So anything you'd like to wrap up with as we shut it down here?
No, I just think your kids will appreciate this. As my kids head into teen years, I realize they might not appreciate anything for, another decade or two, but at some point they will come back to this, and I think really value what you're trying to do for them.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, that's the hope. Someday it will be valuable. Well, again, I just really appreciate your time, your expertise. So great to connect again, Dave. So thanks so much.
Sure. Take care.